Welcome to my third part of my workshop in partnership with Strathmore. For this one, what we're going to do is paint a portrait, and this time with watercolors. And for this, we're going to let the medium shine by taking advantage of its transparency. We're going to make a very open painting and let the features shine fully by working in layers and also fully finishing the piece by adding in some splashes of very dark values as well. So before we start this painting, it's very important that I introduce these art supplies for this, especially because in watercolors, the range in supplies and especially in paper differs so much, and so I would even argue that paper is more important than the paint you use, although that is important too. But for this, the star of this painting is really this Strathmore 500 series in cold press, and they come in ready cut sheets. The size of this one is 8 by 10, but I think the most important part of it is just the quality of the paper. This is cotton paper, which you'll find is a lot different than cellulose paper. It's one of the first things that you'll learn when you're starting with watercolor painting, is that the paper really makes the most difference, and this is almost the most premium paper that you can find. And this one in particular is cold pressed, so it's just a little bit more tooth than the hot pressed variation, which we'll use that too, but that will be for the gouache lesson. For watercolors, I like using cold pressed, if anything for the feel, but for really how much it binds to the paint. And also glazing with that kind of textures, it just feels really special. That will be the paper that we're going to use. Our brushes are very special too. So the first one is my number 10 Princeton Aqua Elite round brush. This one is a little bit stiffer than the other one we're going to be using, but for the process for this one, this makes a lot of sense. But this one does still hold a lot of water, so you'll see how amazing it will be, especially for the very first layers. So the second one that we're going to use is the Princeton Neptune. The one that I'm using is the travel brush, so it sort of just holds itself together, so it's better for traveling. But this is a superstar. It's so soft, and it also holds a lot of water, and it also keeps its shape, so it'll be perfect for the later layers too. And these two brushes will just complement each other when we make our watercolor portrait. So the actual watercolors that we're going to be using is the MaimeriBlu Watercolors in the pans. So as you can see, this one has 12 colors, and for watercolors, I just really prefer ones in pans because it's easier for me to store and it's also easier for me to travel with. But I think what's really special about this set in particular is actually the colors that it has. Having this many earth tones in a smaller set like this is really special, and also just having a handful of cooler colors to pull the warmer ones together just makes this set perfect for portraits in particular. So those will be the art supplies that we're going to use, and now let's start with the actual painting. So the very first thing I'm doing is loading up my brush with water and a little bit of the cobalt blue. But then what I'm doing is mixing that in with a little bit of the cobalt green light. And we're just going to use that very cool color to mark in the shadows of the piece. So when we're starting from the eyes. I really want her eyes to stand out. And so almost all of it we're painting in with this very bright blue, just leaving out the tiniest bit of highlight on there. And then for the rest of the shadows of her face, what we're gonna do is really just mark out where they are, make sure that we're getting the structure of her face down before we start adding in the warmer colors. And this again is just a mixture of our cobalt blue and our cobalt green light. Just making sure here that we are shaping out the shadows well. And while we are doing that, we're making sure that the lighter shadows are also lighter, that the watercolors are focused more on the darker areas, just like right there on her neck, and the rest are a little bit more watered down. So once we have the very cool shadows down, what we're going to do is take our burnt sienna and just add it on the very edges of those shadows. And we didn't wait at all for these colors to dry. We're just gonna let these two colors mingle with each other. Just make sure that we're keeping the burnt sienna right on the edges, especially the eyes, that it's not touching the eyeballs. And we're gonna do the same things to the shadows of our color. And then what we're gonna do for the brighter parts of our face is slowly start to add in the cadmium red light to our burnt sienna and paint that in towards some of the focus parts of her face, like right here at the very tip of her nose. We're purposely making those colors brighter than the rest. And you can see right here too that I'm just laying that down before I go in with my raw umber and adding some of the dark edges on the darker parts of the portrait too. And again, like before, we didn't wait for any of these layers to dry. We really just want these colors to mingle with each other while they're wet. I think the colors that we get are a lot more interesting that way. We're going to do the same thing for the shadows of the rest of her face, like right here on her eyelid, making sure it's darker towards the edges and lighter at the center. But again, I'm just alternating between the raw umber and the burnt sienna, where the colors are a lot more neutral. It's just more of the raw umber. And when I want the colors to be super vibrant, like right here on her cheek, that would be a lot of the cadmium red light. But again, that looks very intense. What we're doing is just making sure that it's very watered down, so when it dries, it wouldn't be as intense and vibrant as it looks right now. Just making sure we have a good basis for the colors of her cheek. So now what we're doing is painting in the rest of the shadows that we see on her face, and these might look very intense, but in the similar way that the first layers of the pencil portrait looked very intense, the next layers with the darker values are going to even these out. We just want to make sure that we're covering all of the bases when it comes to the values as we can before we go in and add the very dark values of the later colors. And the same way that I did her cheek from the left, this is how I'm doing the one on the right. I'm actually focusing it on the very center of her cheek and leaving that there before I get water in my brush and just tapping that onto the other layers too. I'm just gonna let those colors sit there while I paint the other shadows of her face before I go on with water and start to blend in the very intense color of her cheek. We're also making sure that we're leaving out that very nice strip of highlight. We do want to keep a lot of the paper open, so we really highlight the transparency of the watercolors. So right here on her shoulder too, it's almost just pure cadmium red light. And that's because I will then be taking my raw sienna, which is a lot warmer, and using that for the very edges of those vibrant colors before mixing it into the rest of her bust and her chest. For the darker shadows, it will be more of the raw umber. But again, for the brighter parts of the portrait, this is a lot of the cadmium red light, but very watered down with a lot of water in our brush before going in and adding some of these warmer colors to the very green part of her neck as well. While that's wet too, I'm taking my raw umber and mixing it in with my cadmium red light, just getting to be very dark before tapping that dark value into her neck, making sure it's not touching her chin right there, just getting it on the darkest areas of the portrait to really shape out her face as well. After we waited for that to dry, what we're gonna do is take our pure cadmium red light, so it's very bright, and putting that in on the darkest parts of her face before we again clean up our brush and blend it in towards the rest of her lip, leaving out the tiniest bit of highlight right here towards her bottom lip. But the rest of it we're blending out with water, so it's not too intense for this first pass on her lips. I'm also taking that same vibrant color to line her eyes. I really like this look with the cobalt green light. I think it mixes really well with the initial green shadows we've put in. So once that's done, what we're now going to do is switch to our Princeton Neptune brush, and this is essentially a smaller one which is great for adding in the details. And what we're going to do with it is take our darkest colors in our set to complement the very warm and open nature of the first layers. So this is actually the ivory black, which is kind of a neutral color compared to my other portraits, but that's because I intentionally made the first few colors super vibrant so that these last ones will really complement those and bring them out. So we're just now putting it on her irises. And I'm also now taking my cadmium red light, mixing it in with a little bit of my raw umber. There's also still some of the black on my brush, but I'm just using those hodgepodge of colors to line her eyes and give them more definition. So then we're going to do the same thing to her lips, and this one, the colors that I used is a little bit darker than before. So this is the same cadmium red light, but I'm mixing a little bit of the ultramarine blue to it, just the tiniest amount for the upper lip, so that there's difference between that and the lower lip, which is just the cadmium red light at this point. And again, we're leaving those colors down, letting them sit there while we add more definition to her nose. And again, it just looks like we're outlining her nose, but what we're really doing is letting those colors marinate on the paper before we clean our brush and blend them out. After those are done, I am again taking my green, cobalt green light, and this time mixing it in with my lip color to get this dark and neutral color, and just using that to add more of the shadows on her lip, and using that same color too to paint in her eyebrows. And then I will be doing the same thing for her neck, just to add more definition to it in the same way that I did for the bottom of her lip. So once that layer is dry, what we're now going to do is take in our ivory black. So get it to be as dark as we can get it. And we're just now going to paint her hair. So because we really want that contrast in the hues and not just the values, I want to make sure for the darkest areas that this is just the ivory black. And I want to make sure too that it's really shaping out her face right here. So you can see right here, just where the hair is sitting near her face, it's the darkest point. And then as the hair strands go down, that paint will be a lot more watered down. And we're just going to do the same thing for the hair on top of her head. More than anything, we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind how it's framing her face. But also actually for here, where it's sitting the highlight, I've decided to add in some of the raw umber. So there's that little bit of difference in the hues as we get closer to the highlights. So you'll see right here the shadows are a little bit warmer. But as we get closer to the darkest shadows, like where her bangs meet her longer hairs, we switched back again to just using the ivory black. And we're just going to be doing that same principle for the rest of her hair. Where it's the darkest, it should be just the neutral black, and then where it meets the highlight is when we start to add in the warmer colors like the raw umber. It's also great to use the bigger brush this time, the Princeton Elite number 10, because it covers a lot of the areas. And this is where too is you can really see how much water it holds and how much it benefits the portrait a lot, because can just see how those colors are mixing together, and also how the paper handles this much water is great. It doesn't dry as easy as maybe other papers. It's just that the colors mingle with each other, especially when they're wet. And I just really like how watercolors look on this paper. And again, just like before, we're making sure that the darkest areas are just the ivory black, while the lighter ones have more of a warmer tint to them with the raw umber. When we're covering in more areas like this, it's also great to try different effects. Like right here, I'm dropping some raw color on the paper while that water is still wet, and just letting those colors interact within the wet paper and letting them dry naturally to get that really nice look that I think is very special, the medium of watercolors. So after that's done, I'm taking my same brush and just slightly shaping out her upper lids more. And again, it's the same technique as before, just letting the color sit there before blending out the edges with a clean brush. But yeah, I'm just doing that for the parts of the face that I think is just adding a little bit more definition. But once that is done, I am then going back to my smaller brush and taking my darkest colors now to add in the final details of the portrait. Really just want to make sure that we're shaping all of our features out right and that they stand out from the very vibrant colors. But yeah, after that we will be done with the piece. So that is it for this lesson. I hope you guys liked it, and I hope to see you guys for the last one.